Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be discussing the historic visit by Israel's President Isaac Herzog to address both US houses of Congress, and we'll be asking, what does this mean for the special relationship between Israel and the United States? Warm welcome to the programme, and this week's special guests are Sharon Klaff, for UK Director for Campaign for Truth, together with Alistair Scott, who's the UK Director of Joseph Stollhouse or Vision for Israel. And yeah, so welcome to the programme. So pleased to see you both, and also I'm so pleased for the sacrifice that you've made, Sharon, to get here. I know that recently you've hurt your back out and you're in a little bit of pain, but you pushed through. You've made it to our studios. And I'm very grateful, so thank you.
Thank you.
And Sharon, do you want to just give us a little bit of an update on some of the work that you've been doing on behalf of Campaign for Truth?
Okay, so we've been continuing to monitor social media anti-Semitism, as we always do. But the big thing that we did recently was to arrange a viewing of the film J'accuse, which was about the Lithuanians and the Holocaust and how the Lithuanians were involved in killing the Jews who lived in Lithuania for centuries. So it was a very successful event. We held it in East Finchley at the Phoenix Cinema. It was packed to capacity, and hopefully it was contributed towards bringing this information to a lot of people who were unaware of Lithuania's involvement apart from the Nazis.
That's amazing. And you also let me have David to interview as well.
Which was a great interview, by the way.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. So yeah, I really appreciate the guests that helped me get on this programme. And Alistair, we've seen a lot of your faces on this channel recently, so it's good to have you back on the Middle East Report. But just share with us and give us an update, can you, on Joseph Stollhouse? Because I know that there's a big conference coming up in October, and you've kindly asked me to be one of your speakers, so I'm very blessed and privileged to speak at the Feast of Tabernacles.
Yes, it's obviously very busy building up to this is the season of the feasts, and we're going to be doing the major conference down in the Brighton Coast area there, and yeah, it's great to have you as one of our guests. And so there's a lot of build up, and there's a lot of going out and trying to meet up with pastors and leaders just to encourage them to be part of it, and really that's the thing that drives me on is getting into the Christian body and actually reminding them that we have a responsibility to make it known that we're standing with Israel in these trying and testing days. It's real tough times in Israel. But also, you're also a guest on the night to celebrate Israel down in Poole. So we'll have a lot of the Jewish community coming in from Poole and Bournemouth area. And it's a very special evening. There's always great dancing and song and music. And again, we want to just let the people know in every community that we love them. You know, the Jewish are our brothers, and we want to stand with you. So it's an important time. There's a lot of prayer meetings going on within my own life and my own ministry and in our church too. And tonight, after this meeting, I've got a Prayer for Israel meeting back in our Kingdom Faith Church as well. So yeah, Israel's very much
I'm glad Israel's keeping you busy.
Yes,
this is good.
It's a good place to be busy. It's a good place to be busy.
Definitely. And Sharon, as of this recording, because the studio is actually closing for the summer for 3 weeks, we're actually with this program discussing also in the last week of July, which has made the news because we see that Isaac Herzog, Israel's president, has been on an official state visit where he's met US President Joe Biden. He's also met US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and he's addressed both houses of Congress as well to mark Israel's 75th anniversary. Just share with us your thoughts on this important visit and how it strengthens US-Israeli relations.
Okay, so I was a bit ambivalent about this visit because I felt if President Biden hadn't recognized that Bibi Netanyahu had become Prime Minister of Israel and hadn't invited him to the White House, that the President should have said, until you recognize my Prime Minister, I will not be coming to America. However, having listened to his talk, I kind of feel he made the best of that visit, and he brought in all those aspects that we talk about that don't get into the news. So he reiterated Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He spoke about the Jerusalem, I'm just trying to go through in order. He spoke about anti-Semitism. He defined anti-Semitism, and he stated very clearly that anybody who denies the existence of Israel is an anti-Semite, which is where we stand with it. And he spoke about the pluralistic society in Israel, which defies this whole idea that Israel is an apartheid state. So I think he did a lot of good in a way, because he brought a lot of information and a big message to the American people to show them how important this relationship is, not only for Israel, but for America as well. Because without Israel, America's security is in danger.
Absolutely. That's a great analysis, thank you. And Alistair, just share with us why this strategic relationship between Israel and the United States is so important. And it's also interesting, when we look at the special relationship, it's interesting to reflect that when David Ben-Gurion was Israel's first prime minister, when he declared the state, the key factor of Israeli foreign policy was to find a bigger power, bigger than themselves, to give Israel that security protection. And of course we saw that America became Israel's big backer in that protection. But explain to us how this relationship is not only a strategic military relationship, but it's also a strong cultural relationship as well, because of the large number of American Jews living in the United States, and how Americans have always, on the whole, been very pro-Israel.
I mean, it's very, very interesting what Sharon's just been talking about. I was really glad to see the reception that President Herzog got in the Congress there. It was genuine, and it made you realize that the people of USA and across the two parties, they are very for Israel. But it has been tested and you know, stretched recently. It hasn't been as good as it was under the last presidency. But it is so important. And you know what, I think one thing we need to remember, it's not a one-way thing. It's not that Israel is looking to Big Brother to stand with us. USA needs Israel as much as the other way around, because they stand with their intelligence, with their development, and even the technology for the weaponry and the jet aircraft and all the rest. They work together, and it's not like Israel is the junior partner. They are bringing a lot to the table. So it's very important for both sides, but very important for Israel, as you say, because they need friends, and they need big friends. I know I'm reading Bibi's book at the moment, and he talks about his relationship with Russia and over the past. But at the moment, it's important for USA and Israel to stand together. And you know, as Sharon's just said, it's time for the president to actually recognize Bibi. They've known each other. They've been friends for many, many years, decades, in fact. But recently, he's kind of distanced himself from Israel, and Israel needs true friends from the nations. I pray that UK will be one of those strong friends that gets back its position, because there was a time when, back in the 1920s and 1919, when they were given that mandate to rebirth of the nation. So I'd love to see our nation taking a stronger role too.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news report. This one's entitled Deep Divisions inside Israel reflect upon this historic meeting by Israel's President Isaac Herzog.
In the Oval Office, the two leaders talked about the danger of a nuclear Iran and the recent call between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
As I affirmed to Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, America's commitment to Israel is firm, and it is ironclad. And we're committed as well to ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon.
I was pleased to hear about your conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, in which you focused on our ironclad military and security cooperation, because there are some enemies of ours that sometimes mistaken the fact that we may have some differences as impacting our unbreakable bond.
Herzog told reporters they also discussed the current debate in Israel over judicial reform. legislation President Biden has deeply criticized.
I reiterated my commitment, as I said before. Israeli democracy is strong and resilient, and we should definitely see the current debate in Israel with all its facets as a tribute to the strength of Israeli democracy.
The Israeli president also met with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the White House National Security Team. Beneath the handshakes and ceremony, some Israeli analysts like Carolyn Glick say the visit glosses over deep policy divisions between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government.
The Biden administration and Biden himself have adopted policies in relation to Iran, in relation to Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon, and in relation to the Palestinian terrorist organizations that run the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria and Gaza that all represent dangers to Israel. They're all strategic threats to Israel.
I'm so pleased that our friends at CBN can report the news and particularly the historic visit by Issac Herzog to Washington D.C. to address both houses of Congress and to meet with the US President. I mean, it looks rosy now, but it wasn't a few years ago, was it, Sharon? And if we actually compare when President Trump was in power from 2017 to 2021, he centered his entire foreign policy, US foreign policy, around Israel. We saw that he stopped the US funding of the Palestinian Authority, pulled the US out of the UN Human Rights Council together with UNESCO. Because of their hatred for Israel, he also pulled the US out of the Iran deal. And of course, he's made famous for moving the US embassy from Tel Aviv, where it was, to Jerusalem, and recognized Jewish sovereignty over Jerusalem, and also recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights in the north of Israel. And of course, he's also famous for the Abraham Accords, the historic peace treaty between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. So just share with us the big difference between President Trump's administration and that of Joe Biden when it comes to support Israel.
Okay, so you've just described President Trump as the full package.
Yeah.
I mean, he has a man
despite his controversies.
Despite his controversy and despite the media that he gets, this is a man who clearly understands global issues. And he's clearly a very proud American, and he believes in his nation state. And therefore he believes in Israel as a nation state. And he believes nation states should be independent and recognized within the world bodies of countries. In contrast, we've got Biden, who I'm not quite sure what he is, but he's recently, since his presidency, has come out as a bit of a globalist. He's got open borders. He doesn't really seem to mind who comes into his country. So what they've got is a lot of terrorists coming in, a lot of anti-American people coming in, which serves the globalist principle. So although he claims to be a true friend of Israel and claims to know Bibi Netanyahu, his actions actually belie the words. He's rejoined UNESCO, and he's rejoined and supports the Human Rights Commission. It's now called the Commission, not the Council, which is, I think it's got 3 people heading it. Yep. They're all anti-Israel. Pile is the lady who was at 2000 Durban conference. She's from South Africa. She's very anti-Semitic, and Biden has allowed free fall of the UN to come back full force while it finances the UN, while it has America has a very small voice on the UN because it's one country amongst a nation of 192 countries. So Biden has opened the floodgate of anti-Israelism. He's opened that. He refunded Iran. He pulled back sanctions. He sent cash to Iran. As President Herzog said, Iran doesn't have a border with Israel. It's actually got no dealings with Israel, and yet there it is, supporting Hezbollah, supporting Syria, supporting factions in Jordan, supporting Iraq, supporting factions on the southern border in Sinai, with a desire to extinguish Israel. So Biden doesn't seem to be acting against that. So I think he's bad for Israel, but more importantly, he's bad actually for Western civilization.
And of course, he's very weak, and he makes America look incredibly
Exactly.
weak under his
Exactly.
presidency as well. And Alistair, you know, when we saw that Joe Biden was sworn in as America's 46th president back in January 2021, it took him almost over a month to contact his so-called good friend Benjamin Netanyahu, who was then Prime Minister, and he still considers his friend. They've known each other really since the 1970s, but it's a very funny way to treat a friend and also a special ally, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and Sharon's just spoken those words about actions. You know, there's the old saying, actions speak louder than words. And you can say all the right things and in order to, and it's usually to gain votes. I mean, let's be honest about the presidential elections. They just want to pacify everyone to get votes from everybody. But the actions that he's shown in the last 2 years or whatever it is that he's been in control is so anti-Israel in many ways. He may be a friend personally of Bibi going back a long time ago, but you know, one of the things you can see also, that although he's the president, he's like the front man, he's not speaking. You know, there's a team behind him that are manipulating the jargon and the words that are coming forth, and to be honest, as you said, he makes the USA look very weak when you have a president who misses his words, calls China something else, and you know, he gets the nations that he's talking about totally back to front, inside
and
out.
kisses children as well,
Yeah,
which is very awkward.
Everything is just not right. I mean, okay, he's like the very old grandfather. I'm a grandfather, so I've got to be careful. But the one who's kind of losing his mind and can't even remember your name, you know, and that's the impression that the nations get. And I mean, I'm sure Russia and other major China and major players are looking at the USA at the moment and looking at it as being very weak. And as Sharon said, the previous president, you may not have liked him for things he did. He came across his slogan, making USA great again, and that's what he did. He stood there as a definite president with a definite point of view, and he made decisions. He was a decision maker. You don't see that in the present presidency. You know, there are people behind him who are making decisions for him. Yeah. So it's a dangerous place, I think.
And I've heard he only works 4 hours a day. So you know, so as US president, and I don't know how much he can actually take in, which does endanger the United States. It does endanger the free world. And I don't. If he wins a re-election in 2024, I dread to think what mental or physical health would it be in come that presidential election, but there we go. Sharon, now when it comes to Joe Biden's administration and that of President Obama's administration, they're very different. Many people have said that they think that Obama's the kind of backseat driver in Biden's administration. He's the one that is the master puppeteer, pulling the strings behind the scenes. But I think there is a stark difference between the two. I mean, President Obama was absolutely fundamentally hostile to Israel, hostile to Benjamin Netanyahu. And when we look at the two administrations, we see there is great kind of military strategic cooperation, the two nations in a military sense, particularly with Israel joining CENTCOM under US command in the Middle East as well. Those military ties have strengthened, those security ties have strengthened as well. We've seen also that Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has defended Israel on a few occasions, which didn't have in the Obama administration. So as far as a Democrat administration, they're not as bad as they could be, are they?
Well, it depends what bad is. I mean, there are degrees of bad. I think probably not as bad as they could be, because I think America has recognized how much it needs Israel in terms of security, technology, etc. And we can't get away from that. It used to be, when Israel was recreated in 1948, that Israel needed America because they needed funding, they needed imports, they needed all sorts of help to establish a country. As President Herzog said, Israel is established. It's not only established, it's actually created itself as a first world country in terms of production, in terms of world aid, in terms of military achievements, in terms of security, artificial intelligence. Intel's investing, $2 billion now in this current climate in Israel. So I think America needs Israel. Biden's been around a long time. He's not the same as Obama, but I still believe Obama's in the background stirring things. Obama came in, I think, with an agenda to destroy the West.
Absolutely.
Dare I say it?
Yep, yep.
Biden doesn't want to destroy the West. He just wants to look after his family. And he's doing a good job at that. So I think he knows the difference. And he understands that with a weak Israel, America's completely doomed. So, yeah, bad. Does he support Israel? Not very well. But he knows he has to be partners with Israel. Yeah. Israel's a little bit like castor oil. You know it's good for you, but you don't really like the taste of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of how his administration are treating Britain, I think Israel's getting a better deal than the British are in terms of Biden's support for Britain, another kind of part of this special relationship. Let's have a look at this CBN news item in which Isaac Herzog is actually speaking to both houses of Congress in the US to show solidarity with Israel, as Israel recently marked a 75th anniversary reborn in fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
Israel's first 75 years were rooted in an ancient dream. Let us base our next 75 years on hope, our shared hope that we can heal our fractured world as the closest of allies and friends. Thank you, members of both houses, for celebrating Israel's independence. Am Israel Chai. God bless the state of Israel, and God bless the United States of America.
It's great to see then President Isaac Herzog addressing both houses of Congress and getting a standing ovation. I'd very much like to see him addressing both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, considering he has an incredible British and an Irish background, and his father also was a former Israeli president in Israel, but also served with distinction with the RAF during the Second World War, and maybe that should also be acknowledged by our government as well. Alistair, it's so important, is it, when we see that President Isaac Herzog, who comes across as a kind of not so much charismatic, but certainly a very calm individual, and you kind of feel like he's a safe pair of hands. So the fact that he got a standing ovation both from Republicans and Democrats really goes to show how Israel should be. It should be supported by both parties, should it not?
Absolutely. It's quite interesting what you just said, and Sharon answered brilliantly about it's not as bad as it could be, but it's certainly not as good as it should be. I mean, it's far from being as good as it should be, the relationship between USA and Israel, because as we've made the point already, both sides need each other. Israel is such a blessing to the nations in the Middle East because they have so much intellect and intelligence coming through. It's important for us in Europe, but for USA too. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt Herzog is a very stable character. He's a bright man, and you know, in the midst of all that's going on in Israel, he's very much the peacemaker, and he's seen that way. Yes, he's not very charismatic, but then you've got Benjamin Netanyahu, who's extremely charismatic. When he spoke at the Congress a few years back, there were standing ovations like about 30 times in half an hour or something, and he speaks from the hip, but he speaks things that you listen to because he backs it up with facts and figures. So yes, I agree with you completely. This relationship with Herzog as president and Bibi as prime minister is very important for it to continue to grow and bring some healing back into the relationship with Israel and USA, because both sides benefit from it.
Yeah, and Sharon, the problem has, if we look at the kind of old guard, and we pretty much got the old guard in charge of the Democratic Party, particularly Joe Biden, who's the president, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, but the new generation of Democrats, they're the ones we need to watch out for, aren't we? Because it's interesting that that no Israeli speaker or representative from the Israeli Knesset was actually allowed to speak, actually came along to AIPAC, which is the American Public Affairs Committee's annual conference, where it's the biggest pro-Israel lobby organization in the States. And no senior Democrats actually took to the platform to show their support and solidarity to Israel. And we also see this growing progressive liberalism within the party, and of course Israel is not considered part of that. So share with us the battle within the Democrats regarding Israel, because before we had so many supporters of Israel who were leading Democrats, but that's now sadly becoming a thing of the past, is it not?
I think the Democratic Party in America has changed, and it's become really a party of socialism. So it's not the same party, even if the old guard is now still there. It's not the same party that it was. America, as I understood it, used to be a party of middle ground. So you had the more conservative free market people, but the Democrats were also really free market, but with a bit more perhaps social awareness. But now you've got a very extreme Democratic Party. You've also got this huge corruption that's beginning to show within the Democratic Party. And as much as mainstream media like to avoid it, the Biden family are being spoken about, and I think they're destroying the Democratic Party. Obviously, it's something we're not going to go into, but it's a story. It's a bigger than Nixon type story that really needs to come out, and it's destroying the two-party system. But that's not really different to what's happening across the West. You see it in Israel. You see the divide in Israel. You see, once again, Herzog mentioned it, but what he said, I think, was very important in Israel, that democracy, that these demonstrations show the true democracy of Israel. That here you've got an elected government trying to pass legislation. You've got the divide, I think it's 49-50, dividing the country, left and right. And you've got the left being able to demonstrate, but with the Israeli flags. So they're still really a united country, and I think if it came to security, they would stick together despite the bans and all the rhetoric that's going on. Whereas America, I think, is very, very divided. And I don't know who's going to heal it, because I don't see anybody on the Democratic side coming forward to actually have some conversation with what they call the right, to find a way forward for America as a civil society.
Yeah, well, it's like our politics, it's like Israeli politics, it's like US politics. It's become extremely toxic.
It's toxic.
And there are divisions, well, actually I'd say hatred between both sides, which we didn't see a couple of decades ago. Alistair, we saw there Isaac Herzog as Israel's president addressing both houses of Congress, and also knowing his strong British and Irish connections as well. It's so important, is it, because he understands probably the West better than others, and of course he's there as president in a ceremonial role, and also then to kind of provide healing for the nation and to be like the father figure of the nation. But also with there's so much political unrest in Israel, how much do you think that overshadowed his historic visit to the US?
I think it's been a worry because media-wise, there's getting a lot more attention to what's going on in the nation and the extremism. I mean, we're talking about that extreme right, extreme left, and there doesn't seem to be anyone in the middle to be the peacemaker, except Herzog. He comes across as a peacemaker, and he's working double time to try and make it happen. But it is a genuine concern. I was only talking to my wife about this morning, that talking about these extreme elements, because we had a prayer meeting for this morning about Israel, and we was talking about that very thing. But Bibi himself has mentioned when he saw this this group of the two extremes on the train, and they were arguing and you know, very sort of strong arguments, but at the end of the day, as he said, it gave him hope for democracy, because the two parties shook hands and
I think
agreed.
that was on an escalator going down.
Oh, was it that? Going to the
train.
station, that's right.
In
I knew it was
Jerusalem,
something like that.
Central Jerusalem.
And then they shook hands and agreed to disagree, and that is how democracy should be. I mean, we know it in our nation. You can get conservatives one season, and then it's the Labour Party the next, and then it turns over again. But what I've seen in the last decade or so is this extremism antagonism between the two. And as you said, it's not just, it's hostility one against the other. I mean, I even heard somebody in one of the parties, I don't have to mention by names, talking about she wouldn't have any friends who were part of the other party. I mean, that's ridiculous. To say that I only have friends who agree with me. Well, that's a dangerous place to be, because you'll never be corrected if you're going the wrong way. But it is, I love the fact that Herzog has this legacy in our nation, or this connection with our nation. And I have heard that he has made several visits here privately without being sort of in the media eye because of those links. So I believe he has an important role to play with improving the relationship between our country and Israel, although it's very good at the moment, but Europe generally and Israel too, because I've seen, working in Brussels and other places, I've seen the shift coming even amongst the EU members now. They are much more understanding and relating to Israel and realizing they need Israel, just like USA should realize they need Israel.
And Sharon, what are your thoughts on Isaac Herzog as a man and also as president of Israel? And because he's a man of the left, do you think now he's the more acceptable face of Israel for the Democrats? Because he did do a great job when he was chairman of the Jewish Agency. He was also leader of the Labour Party, but didn't have any electoral success, but comes from a great heritage of a family of statesmen.
So I agree with Alistair, what he said about Herzog being a little bit more proactive, because Israeli presidency is really ceremonial. And there may be a lot of discussion behind the scenes with whoever's in power, but they don't really take a forefront in world affairs. And he's stepped forward. He's tried to broker some sort of discussion between the factions in Israel. And interestingly, I read the other day that a crowd of them went to the wall to pray for some sort of reconciliation. So from the left and the right, which was nice to see. So I think he may develop into quite an important person for Israel. Acceptable to the Democrats. As I said to you before, I'm not sure how reliable the Democratic Party is at the moment. I don't think Herzog is as far left as the Democratic Party is traveling. In Israel, I think Amira Hana explained to you, he certainly explained to me, that in Israel you can be both right and left. So you would be right-wing for security, but you can be left-wing on all other social issues. And I think Herzog fits that very, very clearly. He's been in the army. He comes from a very prestigious family. And I think, like most Israeli leaders, his foremost attention is to the security of Israel. And that's unbreakable. But hopefully he will broker a peace between them.
Absolutely, sounds good. So let's have a look at this other CBN news item, and this one refers to Joe Biden, the US president, referring to the US relationship with Israel as being ironclad.
Several days before Israeli President Isaac Herzog addressed a joint session of Congress, the head of the Democrats' Progressive Caucus expressed an anti-Semitic view about Israel. No surprise there. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington State often joins other members of the so-called squad in making anti-Israel comments. This time, Jayapal called Israel a racist state. 412 members of the U.S. House of Representatives disagree. They voted in favor of a resolution this week stating that Israel is not a racist or apartheid state. 9 House members voted against the resolution, including, well, you guessed it, members of the squad, AOC and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. Jayapal apologized for her comments, and she said she meant to say the Israeli government is pursuing racist policies. Folks, anti-Semitic speech has no place in the halls of Congress, and Democrats joined Republicans in condemning Jayapal's remark. But Presidential Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre just could not bring herself to denounce Congresswoman Jayapal, but she said the White House is glad the Congresswoman apologized.
Congresswoman Jayapal did indeed apologize, and we have been very clear. Anytime Israel is singled out with anti-Jewish hate, which is indeed anti-Semitism, it is unacceptable.
Madam Press Secretary, does the president condemn Representative Jayapal's remark, yes or no? You said he's glad she apologized, but does he agree with the statement made in her apology that Israel is pursuing racist policies? Yes or no? Folks, more disturbing than the White House's refusal to condemn Jayapal's remark is the changing American view of Israel. A Gallup poll found support for Israel down about 10% from only 5 years ago. And more Democrats are now siding with the Palestinians. When President Biden met with the Israeli president in the Oval Office on Tuesday, he announced that America's commitment to Israel is ironclad. But earlier he said Bibi Netanyahu's government is the most extreme he's ever seen. So don't expect Mr. Biden to invite Bibi Netanyahu to his own White House meeting anytime soon. In the meantime, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
You can describe Israel as being many things, but you can't describe Israel as being a racist state. And to make those slurs and accusations against Israel, particularly if you are in the US Congress or in the US Senate, is completely unacceptable. Sharon, what are your thoughts? Because I think we've done enough programs, and you've joined me enough programs, you've given me people to interview where we've countered the lies that Israel's an apartheid state. It's so easy, if you have a position where you hate Israel, just to slur Israel with this comment that Israel's a racist state. You know, Israel's a melting pot of so many different Jewish communities all the way around the world, as far away as South America to Poland, to the United States, to the Middle East. Jewish people are from the four corners of the earth living in Israel and bringing their own unique culture. We also see that Israel did everything they could to rescue the Jews from Ethiopia and even risk their security to do it. And also then we see that Israel has also allows that Arab representation in the Knesset, given equal rights and full rights. So it's a very dangerous statement, isn't it? And so easy to make that Israel's a racist state without having any evidence whatsoever to back up what these awful members of Congress are saying.
It is a very dangerous statement to make, and people who make those statements and then apologize for them, and everybody says, oh, well, that's fine, they've apologized. It kind of means you can have any thoughts you want, you can have any views you want, and you can express them. As long as you say, I'm sorry, then it's okay. As though the millions of people out there who are anti-Semites, hate Jews, don't want Israel to exist, didn't hear what you said. And your apology probably won't be heard by those people. So, yeah, it's a very dangerous situation. And coming from a country that practiced apartheid, I'm a little bit of an expert on apartheid. And I know that apartheid is an Afrikaans word, and it means separateness. Separateness means that if you're a black person, you live over there and you don't mix with white people. If you're a white person, you live over there. If you're an Indian person, you live over there. If you're a person of color, you live over there. And there's no mixing. It was illegal, actually, to mix and to marry and to have children together. This does not describe Israel. Israel, as you know, is a completely diverse country. It's the most diverse country in the world. Firstly, Jews, as you say, come from all four corners of the earth. You get Chinese Jews, you get Japanese Jews, you get African Jews, you get white Jews, you get South American Jews, you get Arab Jews. Jews come from all over, and they all live in one country, and they're all educated together, they all serve in the same army, they all go to school and university together. And apart from that, the Christian community under Israel's jurisdiction is growing. The Muslim community under Israel's jurisdiction is growing. The true apartheid is propagated by the people who say they want a two-state solution, like President Biden says, two-state solution in which Jews cannot live in the one state, the state that's going to be run by an Islamic government. Jews can't live there. That's apartheid. Israel certainly is not apartheid.
Can I just add to that, because I think it's also important for our viewers to know as well that it's known as Judea, and this is where we get the word Jews from, Judea. So it's also denying the Jewish people their right to live in their ancient covenant homeland, where we have the Bible, and that's why it's called the biblical heartland of Israel. It'd be equivalent of not allowing British people not to live in London because it's London. But hey, that's a different discussion.
At least you said that.
Yeah. And Alistair, call me cynical, but to have a state visit with just over a year to go before a very important US presidential election, where we see Isaac Herzog addressing both houses of Senate, meeting the president himself, Joe Biden, as well as the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, as well. Isn't this a bit of an electioneering when we realise how cold and distant the Biden administration has been to Israel, and then all of a sudden over the last 6 months been getting a lot warmer?
For sure. I mean, I talked about this earlier. There's somebody in the media background who's thought, hey, it's elections next year, let's make friends with Israel and let's speak positively. So there's no doubt most of what goes on in this time of this season in the US is all about elections. But, you know, as we talked about earlier, it's the actions that actually get recognized. And, you know, coming back to what we were talking about, the racism, I've said this before on programs here. I was with a group that we'd taken over to Israel doing the tours, and it was Friday afternoon. We'd just come through one of the tunnels and we were waiting for the team to come out. And it was, you know, prayer time for Islam, for the Muslims. And right across Jerusalem, all you could hear was the call from the minarets. And my Jewish courier turned to me and he said, you know, we're accused of being racist. Can you hear that? That's the freedom that people have to practice their religion. And that's why it annoys me when I hear apartheid, racism, oppression. These are the words that the media love to use about Israel because it brings headlines and people listen to it. Unfortunately, most people who don't study or don't go into the nation or don't even dig into the truth will hear these expletives or these sound bites and they think, wow, you know, Israel must be a horrible people, and it causes unrest even amongst the Jewish communities in our own nation. So it's really such an important time. I really pray for the days, you know, when politicians, leaders of nations are people of conviction rather than people who are just looking to win votes and have another term. Mind you, looking at the way things are in this nation, I'm not sure anyone wants to win the next election because it's going to be tough going. And so they might be all trying to lose. Maybe you and I could be. No.
No. It's too toxic. Too toxic.
No, it's definitely a time of trying to make profit out of your statements, and I'm sure there are media people behind them telling them what to say because elections are coming up soon, and we need people to vote for us.
Yep. And we also see that the previous president, Donald Trump, was good friends of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think what he said post not being in office hasn't been very helpful, blaming Benjamin Netanyahu for not campaigning on his behalf and helping him win the US presidential election of 2020. Knowing that Israel may have to deal with either the Republicans or the Democrats, depending on the election results, it was an impossible position to put Benjamin Netanyahu in, and irresponsible of any Israeli prime minister to come out and support one political party in the US presidential elections. But there has been a lot of discussion within the Israeli media of why Benjamin Netanyahu hasn't been invited on behalf of Biden to meet Biden in the White House. We know, for example, when he first took office, and I mentioned at the beginning of the program, it took him almost 3 weeks to speak to his so-called friends. So wouldn't it be better for these relations if the Israeli Prime Minister was invited to speak and address both houses of Congress?
Of course, but it's not going to happen. You heard Biden say that Bibi Netanyahu heads the most extreme government that Israel has ever had. And of course he's ignoring the last government that had a bit of Muslim Brotherhood in the government. So no, it's not going to happen. I think Biden, I hear on the grapevine that, I'm not saying Biden directly, but the Biden administration has been propagating help towards the protesters against the Netanyahu government in Israel, just as the Obama government did under V15. And I believe there's funding going towards them. And we need to understand that to produce banners and all of that stuff that they're using costs money, and it's coming from somewhere. So I think that Biden is interfering in Israel's politics, and it's quite right that Bibi Netanyahu didn't interfere in American politics. And I know it upset President Trump because he sees people as friends. It's one of his quirks. And I wish that he would just see them as people he has to deal with in other countries. But sadly, he's, like most leaders, he's got his quirks. But the basis of what he did was fundamentally good. Good for Israel, good for America, and good for the world.
Absolutely. And bring in the kind of biblical dimension to this. Why is it so important that why America and why Britain must have strong relations with the Jewish state, the state of Israel?
It is so important because, biblically the words are there, I will bless those who bless you. But I can remember back to Derek Prince, it was a long time ago, and he spoke about the fall of the British Empire and how it had grown to such a major force, it was a major power in the world. And then they turned their back and didn't complete the mandate that was given to them by the League of Nations. And very quickly, the empire fell. And so that's how important it is for a nation to understand that when you do what the Bible tells us to do, and I'm not saying you do it with the wrong intention, because that tends to be some of the ways that people work. It's if I do this for them, I'm going to get something back. But just do it because it's the right thing to do in God's eyes. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, He's our God, and He has a plan and a purpose for the Promised Land and the nation to be a blessing to other nations. But it has to be a two-way thing. A nation needs to make that relationship in order to get the relationship back, and then. We've just seen in the last couple of decades how Israel as a nation has prospered. Sharon said earlier, we can see now Israel is ranked as one of the top 8 powers of the world. This little nation, which you can hardly see on a map, it's a pinprick on the globe, with a population of 15 million, is now rated in the top 8 superpowers of the world. That's miraculous, and that's the benefit that comes from nations that relate and stand with Israel. Do it because it's biblical. I would do it because it's biblical. I encourage people who are watching to pray for our nations to stand with Israel, because we will see the benefit come back to us. We're beginning to see more of it even now in our nation, in the midst of the chaos, because they are now relating better with Israel. There is reciprocal arrangements going on, and the relationship is getting strong. But I know it needs to be even stronger.
Yeah. And Sharon, if we look beyond the current protests regarding the reform of Israel's legal system, and that's a program in itself, it's not one we're going to discuss on this program today. I have done it before. But leaving that aside, Israel is a light unto the nations, isn't she? And what Israel does in terms of innovation, technology, of helping third world countries, water irrigation, and health technology, that Israel really is a light under the nations, and Israel is the only functioning democracy in the Middle East that also has democratic institutions such as a free press, a free judiciary, an elected government. Despite what the Israel haters say, Israel is a blessing unto the nations.
I think so. I think it's pretty evident, and I don't understand why there's a world out there that can't see that. That last clip that you showed, when you see a visual of people with their faces hidden behind black masks and banners stuck around their heads, carrying rifles that most of us would never see in our lifetime, shooting in the air, shooting people, taking money that President Biden has allowed America to donate to pay for slay, killing Jews and so on. I don't understand why there's a world out there that doesn't understand that Israel is the personification of the Jewish people that really gave the world the value system that we live by. Those 10 commandments that Moses gifted to us are to be treasured and not to be forgotten. They're the most important value system and principles that we've got to live by. Whether you are an extremely religious person or not, there's certain values and morality that we really demand of human beings, and that's being eroded. It's being eroded, I think, because of the whole idea of globalization, where we get back to the beginning of our discussion, that people start with the human being and the family, and then the local area, your neighbors, then your country, and then the world. And they're trying to break down that system. They believe in breaking down the nation state. They believe in breaking down the family values. There should be no mother and father and children all living at home together. So I think we face a progression of issues that have been developing since the last World War this whole idea, and it's another topic to discuss, the whole idea of anti-racism, the idea of critical race theory, queer theory, all of this stuff is brought to us to actually test us. And I kind of think of what's that book called? It's just gone out of my head. I think of The Lord of the Rings, how and the visual of the film that was made for it. It was so sort of impactful to see that, the way they presented it, of this guy with the ring trying to make his way through the evils in the world, and how he was trying to reach the end where he could return the ring. And I think this is what we're facing now, and we're stuck amongst the forests and the wood and the trees. It's prohibiting us from being good, basically.
Interesting.
And Alistair, I mean, this is to be involved in Israel advocacy is becoming tougher, isn't it? The landscape is changing very fast. COVID's had a detrimental impact on so many of the pro-Israel meetings. But for our viewers watching out there, how important is it that Christians who have a heart and a love for Israel meet together, have meetings, unpack what the Bible says about Scripture, but also involve our Jewish friends like Sharon along as well, so they know that the Christian community is sending them a strong message that they're not alone at this time of rising anti-Semitism and hatred, and that the Jewish state is not alone, because we effectively have Israel's back because we're praying and interceding for the nation of Israel.
Absolutely. It's absolutely right, because it is getting tougher. There's no doubt that the voice of reasonableness, to quote the recent thing that's coming out of Israel, is trying to be not only quietened, but silenced. And we got to make sure that we're not silenced, because we're called to be watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem who never hold our peace day or night, and we will continue to challenge. We must continue. We must be bolder in our belief that God is for us and not against us, and stand against the kind of wave. It's like it's a tsunami of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish sentiment that seems to be going on around the world. And so your voice needs to be heard. My voice needs to be heard. Do not be silenced by an enemy who's trying to close down on the truth about Israel. As a Bible believer, we need to be sure not only to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, but also challenging in the church and outside the church, in the politics and outside of politics, in commerce and outside of commerce, challenging people to get their minds right, to think the right way about what is the truth on Israel.
Absolutely. And how important is it to receive that Christian support, Sharon, particularly from our viewers who they're very fond of you and obviously like you coming on the program, because you are one of those few people in the Jewish community that are prepared to put your head above the parapet and really defend Israel and come on a Christian TV station and a Christian program and share from your Jewish experience of why we must all stand up and fight for Israel and the Jewish people.
I think it's incredibly important because when we're fighting for Israel, we're not only fighting for Israel, we're fighting for everybody. We're fighting for a world that can live in some sort of balance. I'm not saying that there will be peace all over the world, because that's a bit that just is too much to ask for. But I think that we're fighting for people to try and get along, to try and look after those who need looking after, and have a civil society, a cultured civil society, without aggression, without killing people. I mean, human beings are the only people who kill each other, the only species that kill each other. You don't find animals killing each other except if they need to eat. So I think it's great. I think we need to have this togetherness. We need to have a discussion. And the Jewish community worldwide is so small that without your friendship, we don't make a noise. Yeah. We're not there. So I think it's very important that we do embrace each other.
Yeah, absolutely, and also it's important, isn't it, as well, that we show a kind of practical love. Yes. We can pray for Israel, which I think is important, and that's a very good theological starting position to pray for the peace of Jerusalem as we commanded to. But it's also important that we take Israel's message of peace to Parliament, to parliamentarians, and also address and confront media bias when we see it as well. And also, what was so interesting, really, is the fact that the IDF needs to be applauded for their military operations, going into a very dangerous Palestinian city like Jenin that has built up a terrorist infrastructure that is responsible for killing over 30 Israelis this year and 52 Israelis last year in terrorist attacks, to go in there in a military operation for 48 hours and not harm one single civilian, despite the fact they're fighting in a kind of urban warfare, is nothing less than astonishing, is it not?
It's miraculous, isn't it? And how important it is for us to actually portray the truth, because most of the media things I watched on news didn't show it like it really was, and it wasn't only until afterwards, when all the weaponry was exposed as to what they found within the supposed refugee city, that people started to have their eyes opened as to what the whole project was about. It wasn't about going in and just showing themselves as being the more powerful people against an innocent people. It was actually cleaning up. And you know, it's just what you said there, the fact that so many Jews have been killed in Israel by terrorist attacks. Can you imagine if that was happening in England and Britain, if you had that many numbers being killed? There'd been an uproar, and yet we almost sit back when it's Israel, almost like there's a price to be paid. And you know, we need to be making sure and shouting out as loud as anyone can, so that people realize, you know, this is an injustice and needs to be confronted with politicians, media services, and everyone else who needs to hear the truth.
Absolutely. So Alistair and Sharon, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Middle East Report. You've both done a great job. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for watching this program at home. We need to continue to pray for Israel. And we're also very pleased that Isaac Herzog, Israel's president, visited Washington D.C. Recently, where he met with the US President Joe Biden. And he also addressed both houses of Congress. Now, for our nations to be blessed, it's imperative that our nations stand with Israel and the Jewish people in fulfillment of Genesis 12, 1-3. So let's be a blessing to Israel, and let's be a blessing to the Jewish people. So thank you for watching this edition of the Middle East Report.